Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today on Lost Film File, I'm going to talk about the lost ending of The Shining. The Shining is one of the most mysterious, often overanalyzed movies probably of all time. It is incredibly spooky and creepy. It's definitely one of the greatest horror films ever made, and I think most people know it fairly well, specifically the ending, seeing Jack's frozen corpse to the New Year's Eve 1921 photo from the Overlook Hotel. But there was originally a scene between those two shots, and it was actually cut a day after it was released into theaters, actually on its second day of release, of limited release on a Saturday. Now, what was this scene and why was it cut? Stanley Kubrick is notorious for going over a film countless times in editing until it's perfect, but in this case, he was actually editing it even after the film was beginning its release, which is quite unusual but shows his extreme perfectionist nature. The scene in question is apparently 2 minutes long from what we are to understand. There are only 3 continuity photos that survived from this. They're kind of black and white Polaroids. They actually do look kind of spooky and creepy, which adds an extra aura to this whole thing. In this scene, we really don't know what this scene is because very few people have seen it. But what we were able to get was a shooting script, which was actually found by Toy Story 3 and Coco director Lee Ulrich. Obviously, there are Shining references in the original Toy Story, which he also worked on. You can find, I'll have a link below, the 4 pages from the shooting script that show you what basically the idea of the scene was. What happens in it is Shelley Duvall's character, Wendy and Danny, are in a hospital after everything has gone down, and then the manager of the Overlook Hotel, who you see at the beginning of the film, Ullman, shows up and basically tells Wendy that the police have exhaustively looked over the Overlook and they haven't found any evidence of anything, that she has offered Wendy and Danny to stay at his place in LA. He kind of insists on it, reassures her everything is fine, you went through a traumatic experience, but it's fine now, and just come to my place in LA and you can recuperate with your son and everything like that. And then gives Danny a yellow ball. And this yellow ball is the same ball that Jack was throwing around earlier in the film. A lot of people have said that most likely the scene would be very different when it was filmed, as Kubrick would keep working on the scene. There's a YouTube channel called Movie Geeks United who actually has a film professor named Steve Mamber who details the scene, which he claims to have seen it. He details the kind of idea of the scene, saying that Wendy basically doesn't respond to Ullman whatsoever. We just hear the ball bouncing, that Danny's throwing the ball, kind of insinuating that he is going to go through the same thing that his father did later in life. But in the comments, Gordon Stainforth comments that he was on the editing team and there was a back and forth whether they should keep the scene or not, apparently even before they released it, and he says that scene wasn't like that at all. Everything I've read about anything about it, that recollection sounds off, but from my understanding, the basic idea of it is Ullman, the manager, comes to the hotel room to see Wendy, tells him that, leaves, and the yellow ball is involved. None of those things have changed. But what exactly did happen with the ending, and how long did it get in? We do know that Stanley Kubrick, for a long time, didn't really like the ending of the novel. He said that the end of the book felt a bit hackneyed to me, and not very interesting, frankly. I wanted an ending that an audience couldn't anticipate, and he wasn't really getting that with this hospital scene in. Stanley Kubrick had seen some test screenings apparently, and had noticed on the Friday screening that ending was not getting the exact reaction he wanted. With the sequence in, he felt the audience left quietly and didn't even stay for the full credits. However, with the sequence out, he noticed that the audience stayed through the credits and there was a buzz within the audience, or so he described to editor Jay Friedkin, who was an apprentice editor at the time, who Kubrick and Warner Brothers hired to go to each of the theaters who were still playing it at certain show times, and even cutting it while it was playing, cut that sequence out and recut the film back together so it would no longer be playing anywhere. Jay Friedkin was sent out and actually got a phone call from Kubrick, who explained exactly where to cut the sequence from, who was very precise about it, and then splice it back together. He was the one who was sent out in New York. Jay Friedkin was an apprentice editor at the time. He was about 23, had worked on Ordinary People that would come out the same year, would be nominated for an Oscar for Babe, and also edited on Babe, Pig in the City. He was sent out like on Saturday morning. He started in New York City proper and ended his day out in New Jersey. And basically, like, at the beginning of the day, the films hadn't started showing and he could cut the scene out and it would be fine. But as the day went on, it was playing. Sometimes the film would be actually being projected and he'd be cutting a different reel and then putting it right on. So it might be the case in some cases, because shows kept playing and showtimes kept playing, as he was being escorted around in a limo throughout New York City and New Jersey. This was a top priority for them to get this scene out of the ending because Stanley Kubrick wanted it gone, which sounds like an awesome story. You should really read the interview he did with the 13th Floor, which is a great interview, kind of like showed you how quickly this thing was cut out. And he actually got to talk to Stanley Kubrick on the phone, and like he went over exactly how he felt about it, why he was cutting it, which I just detailed, and it sort of made sense. He actually had to go to theaters and see how far along the movie was to see if he could cut the sequence from it, because sometimes the reel was already loaded or you wouldn't have enough time to cut it, which is a crazy how close that was. I find it really interesting that like there would be certain people who could be seeing the same movie in the same general area, and one could be seeing the ending and another couldn't, or even the day before you might describe an ending and feel kind of like colder on it than other people. And I'm curious, maybe that was why some of the negative reaction, The Shining notoriously got bad reviews, even got Razzie nominations at the time, believe it or not, for Stanley Kubrick. And I'm wondering if those people saw that cut more or less, or that's kind of how the bad buzz started. But Stanley Kubrick got ahead of that and had Jay Friedkin go and cut that sequence. Got to New Jersey around like almost the nighttime shows, so it played in New Jersey all throughout Saturday, and gave each of the scenes that he cut out to Warner Brothers. He didn't get to keep any of them because they knew exactly how much film he was supposed to give them. Don't think he has that, but he has an amazing story to go along with it, frankly. Kubrick did actually follow up with the editor, because two of the theaters it was playing in the New York area, he felt the box office receipts were rather low. Jay Friedkin commented that one was a theater in Harlem and they didn't really care who Stanley Kubrick was, they just liked a horror movie trailer, and the other was an art theater and they weren't as into Stanley Kubrick as well. So it was less of the ending and more of the location itself. It opened in limited release only in New York and LA. There's been some disputes online I've seen over whether it actually did play in LA, because there seems to be way less documentation on the LA release versus the New York release, which we have an interview, there seems to be ads, all these things. I do believe there was an LA sequence, but no one's come forward to say who was the other editor in LA who was doing this at the same time that Jay Friedkin was. He mentions that I wonder who the guy was in LA. He doesn't even know. So who knows what went down there, and how quickly they cut out the scene there. I haven't heard really much of anything from that, but I actually don't doubt that it was in LA. I just think they're being a lot quieter about it. It was cut so late in the game that the two actors who played both the nurse and the police officer was played by Burnell Tucker, and the nurse was played by Robin Pappas, are still credited in the credits of the film, despite not appearing in the film that people saw, I guess. But originally the credits were correct, but obviously they cut that sequence, so it wasn't any longer. Stanley Kubrick actually kept cutting The Shining and actually cut 25 minutes out for the European cut and international cuts, believe it or not, feeling that Americans needed more explanation than European filmgoers, which in some cases I agree with, in some cases I don't. What was interesting is there was a Reddit post about this, and I found a good kind of a funny story about an American who married a French woman, and they would get kind of like in arguments over The Shining, and he would remember scenes that she didn't, and they could never figure out why this was, because she would be like, that's not in The Shining, and later finding out that there was a European cut and an American cut, which is kind of interesting. Like, this film was constantly being edited. I'm very curious to see the European cut of it, because I know this film still plays quite a bit in Europe. I'm curious which version they're playing, frankly. I didn't even know that existed, and apparently a lot of people didn't. This sequence has never been found. All we have are the shooting script pages and the continuity photos, and that's it. It's never been released. The ending of The Shining that was in the first day of release has never been seen since. It's one of cinema's great pieces of lost media because we just don't know it. But in a lot of cases in lost media, some of it you kind of want to find so much, you kind of want to know. But I think honestly this was a good move. The ending of The Shining is iconic. It's scary. It's weird. You're not exactly sure, like, why is he in the photo? What is the mythos of this hotel? You don't really fully understand it. And kind of giving it a little bit more of an explanation, which it doesn't fully, but it doesn't give it that sting, that punch. And that's what Stanley Kubrick wanted. He wanted that kind of thing that, like, made you think, made you kind of scared and spooked and excited you. And that scene in the hospital, just from reading it, doesn't really do that. So I think this is one of the great pieces of lost media, but I understand why it is completely lost. I sort of think one of the bigger reasons it's continued to be lost is The Shining is one of the great horror movies of all time. And would releasing this ending ruin that reputation, ruin its amazing reputation that it's built up over the years on home video and theatrical screenings that it didn't get to have in 1980. I've often wondered that about this ending, and it shows you how important editing certainly is, but particularly how much that scene clearly was bringing down the movie, according to Stanley Kubrick at least, and how much it helped that film later on not being there and help that punch of an ending that kind of pronounces the mystery of the Overlook Hotel and what exactly happened there. And I guess that end hospital scene definitely robbed it of that a little bit. And frankly, I'd much rather live in a world with an amazing, incredible horror movie directed by Stanley Kubrick than just having this bonus scene or having it publicly available. But I can't help but wonder what could have been, or really what it was, and at the lengths they went to take it out. So if you would like to talk about the lost ending of The Shining or have your own theories, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.